it's such a weird world to see two assassination attempts that close together, and to see it make people on the left say harder, I hope the guy gets it one of these days, and then say, this is your own fault. This is the kind of thing that happens to people like him. This is the kind of thing that happens when people like you push for guns. um just seeing like the victim blaming, all of the, it's almost like um there's a giant corporate narcissism that we're watching in live watching live. Yeah, that's been odd. I don't know what else has been going on in the news.
Well, that's the thing. So I think this is going to get to kind of one of the things I want to talk about a little bit today. I actually wanted to go back and talk about Christianity and liberalism. And I think it's all going to get there, but I wasn't surprised.
There was another attempt.
Yep.
Yeah,
I wasn't
no,
surprised.
not
That
at all.
bothered me. That bothered me because whatever happened between the first attempt, where I was like, oh my goodness, we have to go live. We have to do a live show. I'm rushing into the studio halfway through the middle of the day, organizing the production crew, getting everything ready, thinking through stuff, trying to get the facts, all that stuff. And this time I was like, see what happens on Monday when it all rolls out. And I wasn't surprised at all, kind of expected it. And that bothered me. And here's the thing, Jason, I expect there to be another one.
I think there will be. But I think what's the wildest thing is watching people say with a straight face, Trump supporter attempts to kill Trump.
Right.
On Twitter. That or the ABC one, which was where the actual reporter, the journalist, said after an attempted assassination, or just before this attempted assassination, Trump raises the rhetoric on
Yes.
immigrants, and
Yes.
like you're seriously, as a journalist, not giving us the details on, instead of giving us the details on what has happened, you're blaming Trump for somebody trying to assassinate him. I mean, I think it's the sort of thing that I think, if anybody has ever spent much time with a narcissist.
But yeah, I was going to ask, what do you mean by narcissism?
Well, it's a psychological disorder, in which you can't put you have no empathy, you can't, or sympathy, or you can't put yourself into other people's situations, and everything is interpreted in terms of how it in where your motivations you consider pure, and so anything you do is good. It's they used to actually call it a God complex, in psychology, in the history of psychology, but then they had to disallow the use of God in any sort of psychoses. But it's a mental disorder, or it's like a broken mental. It's kind of hip right now to go around and say, well, I'm dealing with narcissists, right? But it's an actual mental disorder where a person where something about their humanity has been disconnected from their mind. So, and
we're all narcissists now, Jason.
well,
You know?
There might actually just be something to that, but there seems to be so what often happens is a narcissist will attack people and then explain to people while they're attacking them that it's their own fault, that they are not attacking you. I'm not attacking you. You are being attacked, but it's your own fault. What you did this to yourself. That kind of thing is a typical way that somebody with a God complex or somebody with narcissism deals with people, right? So they're doing something wrong, but in their mind, the other person that they're attacking is the one doing it, and so but you have almost like a whole well, I think socialism is sort of a corporate, it has this corporate narcissism aspect, because the state is corporately claiming what only God has, right? So it's a corporate God complex, but you start to see people that buy into it, or that the way that the state talks about itself starts to look like narcissism. So I've seen another, often an abusive boyfriend or an abusive husband has some sort of narcissism, right? Because they can hit somebody smaller than them and they don't feel bad, right? They think, well, this person got themselves hit, right? And even though I'm the one that did it, they're the one that did it to themselves. And I've seen a lot of people compare the state to an abusive boyfriend. Like, you keep doing this to us, and then we keep coming back to you and saying, well, this time it'll be different, right? This time it's going to be different. So, but I think that that there's a corporate God complex, and that shows itself in moments like this, because whatever you think of Trump and his personal life and all of that, he's a threat to the system. There's no doubt about that. And so the system keeps attacking him to try and get him into place. And now it's willing to kill him. And people are like, well, he's doing it to himself. Like, he's not shooting at himself. Or when people say, well, this is because he keeps blaming his enemies for this. That's the other one where it's like, Trump keeps blaming his enemies for this. That's the sort of thing that's going to get him shot. Look, who's shooting at him if he's if it's not his enemies?
It's funny you say that. I want to bring this clip in because this is exactly what I was just looking at, where it's like, Trump's like, you guys have been talking crazy about me this whole time. It's not me, it's you guys' rhetoric, Hold on. I think I can hear this. Hold on. Let me see.
I just don't.
Can you hear that?
I can, yeah.
Okay.
I don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
People need to start taking to the streets. This is a dictator.
There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
Enemies of the state.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless.
When they go low, we kick.
How do you resist the temptation to run up and wring her neck?
The biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized right up to the right.
I thought he should have punched him in the face. I said, even if you lost, he insulted your wife.
Yes.
He came down the escalator and called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He said, well, what do you think I should have done? I said, I think you should have punched him in the face and then gotten out of the race. You would have been a hero.
I'd like to punch him in the face. I said, if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
Punch some people in the face.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump, and that's a fact.
Look, as his character is stabbed to death.
Where is John Wilkes Booth when you need him?
I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
A Missouri state senator is under investigation by the Secret Service after saying she hopes President Trump is assassinated.
I will go and take Trump out tonight.
And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
They're not going to stop before Election Day in November, and they're not going to stop after Election Day. And that should be, everyone should take note of that on both levels, that this isn't, they're not going to let up, and they should not.
If you think we're rallying now, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Man, Cauldron Pool has not missed with putting those things out. They have killed it. And well, let me use a different language. They have done a fantastic job producing those video pieces. Everything's so heightened right now, you know. But Jason, one of the things I was thinking about is when you go through Cross Fingers from Gary North, he talks about the strategy of the left and that they get away with this type of stuff, right? And what one of the questions I was asking, because I don't know if he deals with, I don't know if he deals with this, but if we started saying as conservatives that we're not going to allow you to talk like that, we're going to bring charges on you for liable and stuff like that, we get looked at in the public eye as if we are being aggressive with our opponents, right? Like they are literally using lawfare to come after Trump. But the rhetoric that they're using, the way they're talking, the things that they have done, Ted Cruz and other senators have been eating out and people have just come up to them and ruined their evenings and harassed them in so many different ways. If we were to actually engage using the law, we would be looked at as monsters. And so we don't do it because we don't want to wield power because of public perception versus we don't want to wield power because what's right. You know, like it's like, this is right. We should wield power to do justice, but we're so concerned about how people might look at us. Liberalism depends on us not doing those type of things that are right in the moment, right? So how do you get past this kind of chasm and then exercise a form of winning the public conversation and the righteous law implementation?
Well, I think what's hard is there are two aspects to this, because there's a short game and a long game, and the conservatives haven't been playing the long game, and that's why we keep losing. So even when we win a short game, if you think about something like the Scopes monkey trial, the Scopes trial, right? What people don't realize is that that trial was won
years before they ever got there, huh?
Well, we literally won the trial, right? So the evolution didn't win the trial in the moment, but what happened was they were playing a long game, and so that was one aspect of their play, not their whole play. So when the jury makes the decision in favor of against evolution, then they were ready to take that and use the oppression in their story, right? So but whereas I think conservatives have tended to think this is a game that we're playing, chess, and liberals have been, or we think we're playing checkers maybe, and liberals are playing chess, where they say whether we win, if we win, then we move things this way. If we lose, we move things this way, right? So they have a much more, ironically, they have a much more corporate understanding of these sorts of things. Whereas conservatives think, oh no, this thing happened. Do I sue or not sue? Well, if I sue, it gets worse for me in the short run. If I don't sue, then I can keep moving along. If I do sue and I win, then it's over, right? Versus, okay, here is how a lawsuit fits into the story that I'm in. And I think
we
this
look at
is
war. We look at battles as if they're wars instead of all of these battles as a war.
right. And there's an aspect in which all of this is part of the big war with the serpent. But that one doesn't divide straight down the middle, like left and right, in the Hegelian kind of thesis antithesis of right-wing, left-wing politics that we live in. Because a lot of folks on the right are also, you get the log cabin Republicans in California. Though they're on the wrong side of the debate with, or of the argument with the serpent, or the war with the serpent, but then they're on the Republican side or whatever. So right, it doesn't divide. That one doesn't divide quite so easily. And even the fact that we have sort of bought into a Hegelian dialectical understanding of politics has this right left argumentation that's going on all the time, and rather than that's actually a part of the that's a part of the problem with the way that we think about politics, because you look at guys like Dick Cheney, who just came out in support of Harris.
Makes sense.
It does make sense, but it didn't for a long time to us because we think in those Hegelian terms, rather than think in principled terms.
Yeah,
right?
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, so we, and that's what knowing our history, knowing even like understanding what kind of law system we live in, and understanding our local histories, all of that should come into the way that we deal with things and fight for what's right, and try and protect our neighbors, and protect our property, and protect our children, protect the future, protect the law, all of those sorts of things. But we just think in terms of right and left, and don't realize, and we didn't realize for a long time that whole system had been hijacked by globalists.
I as you're saying this is something that's been really, really, really bothering. I've been thinking a lot about Christianity and liberalism and American history, and the last 3 years of us talking, I've seen a lot of things that we started talking about become a lot more in the forefront of the conversation that everybody's talking about. And we're years ahead of this. But if you try, this is why I think the church really is the only answer to all of this problems, because there isn't an institution. So I'm trying to connect what you just said about history, and I'm just going to let this spill out of my head because it's going so fast what you just said. But trying to recover an American history doesn't re-anchor the religion that needs to be in the center point of the society. It re-anchors the civil side in one sense without a tether, right? It can only go so far. So what you really have to do to anchor both the civil side and the economic side, which I mean family by that, is you have to have a revival of the historical Christian religion. You have to. If you don't have that, then you won't get a family that's historically connected to Christianity, and you won't get a nation that is historically connected to Christianity. So then you don't get a society that's historically connected to Christianity. And so the religion is the central part of all of that. And it was making me think the thing that people are complaining about at face value is not necessarily the when people are saying, oh my goodness, there's folks coming in from outside of our country that don't have our principles. They don't live in society like we do. They don't eat the way we do. They don't worship the way we do, they have a completely different civil engagement with each other. And what people are really saying, and they don't know this yet, but this is what people are really saying, these folks have a different religion than we do.
Right.
Because the religious aspect, all religions have a fifth commandment in them, which is how do we engage with the history that we have and the people that are here in a way that honors the God that we serve. Right. So,
right.
And
one of the
I'm-
things I just finished the first season of a TV show called Silo.
Yes. Yes. I saw
and
that.
What was crazy was watching it, and I just kept thinking, okay, at some point, because it was a completely secular society with no religion, but everybody really wanted to do what's right, except for a few people that were evil at the top that were manipulating everybody. Everybody else really wanted to do what's right. And I thought, but why? What it's a complete fantasy that you can have a group of people. I mean, it was because it's basically this. It's a post-apocalyptic, set out in the future, 100 years previous. Everybody had to hide in silos and wait out some sort of apocalyptic thing that's going on outside that's killing everybody, or that killed a bunch of people. And so there you've got these silos, or this silo that is continuing to exist. People are working for the good of everybody else around them, but they don't know their history. They don't know how they got there. They don't, and somebody does, but it's being hidden from the normal people. And what is a fantasy about it is they actually don't have any idea how real people are motivated, because there's no such thing as a non-religious society.
Right.
So, so it was really just frustrating, because you think this was written by a group of people in LA that maybe don't know anyone that doesn't already agree with them. That's probably how it worked. Or maybe Vancouver, BC, or someplace where everybody that they think, if me and my friends got trapped in a silo, we'd be good. But what they need is, I mean, they need to read Lord of the Flies about 100 times and be reminded that that's just not how real. That's not how real people act, because we are all acting actually out of religious convictions. That society is an outgrowth of religious convictions, and that religious convictions are. Because then the question becomes, how are religious convictions formed in a society? Where does that all come from? Which is a different sort. And Christians on the right, Christians on the left, everyone is arguing past each other, because they're not even asking questions like, okay, let's say you do have, you do suddenly find yourself in a situation where you've got a bunch of different religions. What does that actually mean? What does that look like? And then, because they immediately say the federal government needs to fix this. The federal government needs to fix this. And that's the one thing everybody agrees on.
Mm-hmm.
The federal government needs to fix this. And so that's the fight we have. And so we're missing out on the fact that a long game is being played all around us, and the religious convictions of us and our children are all being formed and transformed, deformed by people that understand how those religious convictions are made. And so even if we win a something in the middle of even if we win the fight over the wall, right, and a wall gets built, it's not going to matter if the continued deformation of Christianity in America is goes on unopposed. So, for example, did you know that this month was declared Latino Heritage Month? Right? They understand that they can form a new religious sentiment into the next generation if they just control the calendar. They understand that they are declaring the religion of the civic sphere through that sort of calendar work.
Is this
and we're running away from the church calendar more and more and more.
Is this what you mean by institutions? You've been talking about on your Substack about how institutions are made to shape us, and we keep there's a play being run on us inside of this, which is to say institutions have failed you, and so we're here to take them over, as the liberals like to say, or the conservatives for that matter.
Yeah.
And so they're there to take them over, and then we lose complete distrust in institutions, so we don't care anymore about the institutions, and then we don't form new institutions. We just don't trust any of them to do anything anymore while we leave them in power, right?
Exactly.
And then we think we're going to shape or frame something apart from the institutions, and that's just not a reality. And so is this, and so what you're saying, I guess this is why I keep going back to what is it then that we need to be doing, or how can we as the church reestablish our institution so that it affects the society and the culture that we're in? Because that's what the church is supposed to. I mean, everybody talks about being salt, and then they believe that, but then they don't actually expect the salt to actually have an effect on society. That's weird to me. I don't like those people. They're the weirdest people in the world. They're the people who believe they could salt a steak and then don't expect to have flavor in it when they bite it. That's weird.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think it's what they think is that really what we need is a salt lick. We just need everybody retreating to just their Christianity over here, and then we'll lick the salt together, but you don't want the salt to get onto anything. But that's not it's not the first time that we've done that. And what's amazing about it is because you have the all of the monastic movements of in the Roman Empire. The problem was all the attempts even to retreat, they couldn't help but be transformative. You don't have to believe and try to be transformative. You just have to do what God calls you to do, and you will be transformative, because we don't transform by because the transformation isn't a matter of getting ideas about transformation into everybody's head. The transformation has to do with faithfully living before the Lord, trusting Him, and He's the one that does the transformation. And but the transformation also has to do with the means of grace, almost all of which are institutional. When God established the means of grace, they're almost all institutional. There's very few personal or individual means of grace. Now, prayer is an individual means of grace and a corporate means of grace. But the Lord's Supper, you can't just sit down and say, I'm going to give myself the Lord's Supper.
No,
right?
There's a lot of people who think they can. There's a lot of people who think they can. Unfortunately.
I wonder how many of them realize that's literally one of the things that caused the Reformation was private communion.
Speak your speak, bro. Speak your speak.
So private communion was was listed as one of the central objections. You had people that were doing private communion and the reformers just said there's just no biblical basis for private communion. Communion is a corporate meal. It's an ecclesiastical meal. It's a meal for the whole family of God. And
So then would that interpret over to baptism too? Because I think there's a lot of people who think there is a private baptism. So they'll go, like I was at one where somebody said, "Hey, there's a pool right here. Why don't you come and just baptize me in this pool?" Like, is that
And it wasn't he
wasn't
he
a
wasn't
service.
a pastor or anything, or
He wasn't a pastor, no.
yeah, that would be the same sort of thing. So now because we have like we have Philip and the
Ethiopian
eunuch,
eunuch, yep.
the Ethiopian eunuch, where the baptism, we know it doesn't have to be in a church service, but Philip he's ordained, right? So he can do that. He's a representative of the church, and I also think that's a special situation because you have Philip, or because you have the eunuch is on his way to some place, so he can't bring him back to his church, but the church baptizes, right? You don't have individual Christians given the right to baptize, right? It's the church that baptizes. Now there are always complex situations, but complex situations don't make for good normal day in day out ways of doing things, right? A church should have a normal way of baptizing and expect to just consistently and regularly be baptizing. They shouldn't Baptisms shouldn't be happening once every 30 years. There's something has gone wrong if you're not consistently baptizing. And I don't care if you're a Baptist or a Presbyterian or Paedo Baptist, whatever. You should, if a healthy church should be consistently baptizing, so everybody knows, well, this is how a baptism works here, right? Because I've seen 30 of them in the last few years. But because the baptism isn't just the individual making his declaration before the Lord. The baptism is entry into the church. The baptism is God putting his name on it. The baptism is a reminder to everyone who's baptized. The baptism is a renewal of the life, the corporate life of the church. There's all sorts of other things going on in the baptism that the church needs. So it needs to be happening. It's it's public. It's a public declaration, and I mean this is one of the most interesting things throughout history is those places where it's illegal to baptize civically, in Muslim countries, in communist countries, in different places when it's been illegal to baptize. The way the church wrestles through the reality that baptism is a public event, that baptism is that's always been hard, because you end up with people saying, well, my baptism has to be public, but it's illegal. What do I do? It's a little like marriage, in that you can't go back into the closet and get married. It's a public covenant. Baptism is a public covenant as well. But one of the things that tyrants have done have tried to quash the church by making baptism, making conversion illegal.
Well, I mean, yeah, because every nation, every tyrant has its own religion that it comes with, right?
Right.
And so it's like, we don't do. I was just thinking about this the other day. I'm sorry, I'm going down so many rabbit trails, but I heard church bells ringing.
Where? I'm jealous.
In Genesee. So in Genesee, there are
church
church bells ringing there, and it rings every noon and every night at 9:00, and on Sunday mornings, of course, when it's time for church. And it hit me, and I was like, this is a public noise violation.
That's how they've gotten rid of church bells in a lot of cities.
Are you serious?
It's evil. Yeah.
Well, that just should tell you that you've lost your Christian nation. So this is fascinating. The church, I've been thinking about this so much, and I haven't finished putting it all together. I'm almost scared to drop it out. Church bells, their origins are directly, in America anyway, are connected to American freedom and religion. Like they are just like so intertwined together. Paul Revere, right? It was signing the Declaration of Independence. All those things, call to church worship, those, like, it's so intertwined that you can't really separate those two. And so when we hear church bells, our nation and the nation's God are being represented in that sound, right? It's our thank you and amen, right? In church bells. And it reminds people to come to the house of the Lord to say thank you, right? And so that's part of our historical religion and history, right? Those are all, and you can't separate those two. And so the public space, when church bells are going off, is being claimed that this is an American nation that trusts the Lord for its freedom and for its ability to be able to worship, right? Like liberty is being proclaimed in the sound of church bells. And it's not a neutral idea. It's saying that the public space sound that just goes everywhere. It's our proclamation that this is a Christian nation. It's just, that's what it's supposed to be.
Right.
And the fact that we would have any other sound from any other religion owning that space is the sound of being taken over. So if you were getting calls of prayer, Muslim prayers, you're done. If you're getting Buddhist, whatever any other religious sound that owns a space in that way without being penalized, and the fact that they would penalize or remove church bells because it's a noise violation means you're done,
Yeah.
right? Because the religion is completely under attack at that point.
Because it's a question of who is the potentate of time.
Yes. Oh, that's right. It keeps time. Yes. Thank you. Keep going. I'm not going to interrupt you.
And because the church bells are an artistic claim being made that Christ is the Lord of time, right? That you put the church bells as the clock of the city, the aural clock of the city, the sound clock of the city, and it's a reminder and a claim that Christ is the Lord of time. But it also, you've got all sorts of kind of historic, poetic understanding of church bells, church towers with bells, church organs being played through the tower, different things, that it's one of the ways that the church poetically keeps the devil at bay from the city.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw Venom 2, which was fantastic, but there's this whole section when they're fighting in the church, and they end up using the church bells in order to fight off the devil Venom. And I'm watching it thinking, he has to basically submit to crucifixion to defeat the devil in the church. It's really smart writing, and I'm like, this is Venom 2.
Yes, that's I don't think they. Nope. I think that they just stumbled on that. I just think.
I'm sure. I don't think there's anybody that went along and said, you know what I'm going to do, right? But they know that there are certain images that communicate certain things, right?
It's in their bones.
It's in their bones. They're not trying to make a claim for Jesus, but it is a reality that Jesus has already made the claim on the West.
Right.
So you either lean into the reality of how storytelling works, or you fight it. And Venom 2, I think, was a good example of leaning into it. You get into a church, the bells become the enemy of the wicked.
Yeah.
And then the good guy is the one who's willing to be crucified to rescue the city from the bad guy. It's just really, I mean, he literally, like, they put nails through his hands and feet in the process. So they're not hiding it. It's like holes, when you get to the top of God's thumb and he has to pierce his hands to save his friend. And and then he dies and resurrects, right? It's that storytelling. The reason that works is because Jesus is actually Lord of time. He's actually Lord of history, because it's not like this is always the way storytelling has always worked. It doesn't work this way everywhere all the time. But the places where the church has gone out and had a major influence, it forms the imagination in a particular way of the people that are even born there. So, I mean, this is why you've all of a sudden got atheists going, "Oh wait, no, I'm a cultural Christian."
Cultural Christian. It's formed
cultural Christian.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it all over the place. From atheists that are saying, they're realizing, oh shoot, when we let all of the Muslims into England, without any insistence that they enculturate to us, there isn't the option of neutrality, right? We're now enculturating to them, that's how it works. So all of a sudden, the public spaces, the markers of time, all of those things are being changed and transformed. Well, what's happening in America isn't so much the Muslims, although I've heard that places in Minnesota and that there are places where it is happening. Dearborn, is that what it is?
Oh, we call it Dearbornistan.
Dearbornistan, right?
Yep. Where they're using Sharia law as a law there in some cases. So
so you've got places where that's happening, but because we don't actually recognize what are institutional markers, and the communists do, they are advancing even in places where we think we're beating them back. They're advancing because they're rewriting the calendar. COVID completely put the calendar up for grabs, and we had no reason to feel like we needed to defend it. It's the calendar now is marked out federally by which it's a critical race theory calendar now, right? That's the official religion of the federal government. And so even though we've pushed it out of some of the public school systems, and it's already controlling the calendar, right? So you depending on what month you're in, you are celebrating a different oppressed minority group. You have different groups according to the flesh, as Paul would say, marked out and reified by the calendar. Now this is a real thing, a real difference. This person is oppressed. So when so you've got Pacific Islanders, Asian and Pacific Islanders month. You've got Latino month. You've got right. So the institutions have been transformed already, and so now they can just wait it out, right? It doesn't matter if they lose a battle here or there. The formative institutions are now doing their work.
They've been taken over the last 150 years, and now they're just starting to implement their plan of now we're transforming. We're waiting for one generation to die out. Now we transform.
And they've done, because now they get to wait it out. They've done the work to get the fourth estate. This is why they hate Elon so much, because they did all of the work to get the fourth estate, and they had it.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was like, wait a second, something evil is afoot.
And if anybody gonna do something evil, it's gonna be me.
It's gonna, yeah. So it was, which I don't have a category for guys like Elon.
I do.
What the righteous pagan? Wait, what's your? I mean, that was an older category that they used to use.
Yeah.
A pagan who is an overall good for society, even though they're not a Christian. And but I don't think you can even say that anymore because of the words changing meaning. But what's your category?
I think of him as a ruler that funds the Reformation. So,
okay.
I think, you think you have Old Testament leaders people who are working and doing their jobs, the king would see their countenance and be like, hey, you've been so good to me. What bothers you? Right. He fits in that category for me. It was like,
okay.
And he sees it too. And he might be like, wait a second, that's going to have a problem for me. And if I have more of you, that's better for me. I think you even have atheists who are fitting into that category, who are lords or oligarchs who, this is why I still believe that even though America is set up the way it is, I think we still have the aristocracy. I think we still have all those categories. We have you talked about the 4 states. So then you have the civil, you have the religious priests and stuff like that. You have the aristocracy, and then you have the press, right?
Right.
And so I think he fits inside of that aristocracy.
The aristocracy.
Yeah.
I can see that. I think that makes sense.
And I think when you have some aristocrats will never go along because they're actually good lords, right? I think you can have good lords. And this is the thing. I would rather, in situations like that, I don't have a problem with the way that people can run systems and governments necessarily. So long as we have the righteous men that are in those positions, we'll be fine. Everything will work just fine because we're already there in one sense. Like we just have bad guys leading it because we have bad people, right? Who are presenting those guys. So you can't get away from it. People think that the magic is in the system when the magic is in faithfulness, right? Like that's where God blesses, right? Is in being faithful. And people think if we have the right system, no, wickedness, sin gets in everything and ruins everything. So anyway, that's where I have a lot to say about where I think Elon fits at, but that's not what I was trying to do.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting though, because he doesn't fit the right left narrative. Although I think he has been kind of claimed maybe by the right, and you see him kind of accepting some of that.
You know what? Let me say this. We take for granted the historical principles of Christianity and the saturation effect they have on individuals. So the free market is a Christian concept and idea. It's a Calvinistic concept and idea, right? And people forget that. And so when other people benefit from it, what they end up doing is what the Old Testament said they would do. What kind of God do these people have that they have such good laws like this? Right. And so people forget that. We think that the idea of free market is a neutral concept. It's not. It's a Christian one. And when people say, I've benefited really fantastically from Christian ideas and concepts, anything that's a threat to that, I don't want it to exist. Right.
Right.
And we forget that we have reality on our side. This is why I love what David Bahnsen does. And he's arguing constantly for a free market, because a free market and that institution is a Christian idea that perpetuates human flourishing.
Right.
And we give up so many. This is why I've been so annoyed at Christians lately, because we give up all these concepts and act like the gospel is just something that's going to stay over here in the corner. No, it doesn't. The gospel itself is the thing that creates a society that makes us look sideways at somebody who decides to litter. It's not a neutral idea.
Right.
That's a Christian concept that's been built up over history. This is why when you've been talking about history, it's been permeating my head, because I'm like, wait a second. Over time, through the Magna Carta, through common law, Christian history, Reformation, all that stuff has built up to this moment to make us who we are right now. And not just us, the rest of the world, but particularly where it's been focused and embraced. Make us the kind of people who have built our society that say we should have ambulances, right? We Christians came up with hospitals. It is that kind of Christian thinking over time that said, how do we help people best? And it's not a neutral idea. And we've given up all of that it's ours. And so I think when somebody like Elon Musk says, wait a second, I've benefited extremely well from free speech and a free market and free people who work hard. If that goes, then everything else goes too. And so while he might only be focusing on free speech and a free market, and he's not necessarily a free market, he still likes some of the fascism because it works for him. But for the most part, mostly free. He's trying to save what Christianity has developed through time of working itself out, being sanctified in history. And we have given up all of that. And now that's what people are complaining about the most, is that the sanctification that's built this kind of people over time in Christianity is being taken away. What they don't know is that there's a God behind that sanctification that requires you to live a certain way. And through that faithfulness, blessings come to your nation. And you get better over time, you know?
That it's not a machine.
It's exactly.
It's not an impersonal force that capitalism hands out blessing as an impersonal system.
Come on now. That's good. This is why. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's actually part of the reason there's this, that the division doesn't end up going straight down left, right.
Yeah.
Scenarios. I saw a really crazy article explain. It was a guy that went out who was doing a survey, and he thought it was going to go a particular way, and it didn't. And it was people's opinions on war. So he went out saying, expecting to find, the right was full of people that loved war, didn't care or worry about other nations as long as it worked out well for us, and that the left would be a bunch of people that really thought, well, war is terrible and we should stop it whenever we can. And he's like, it was exactly the opposite of what I've been always told about the difference between the right and the left. The left, the idea of a bleeding heart liberal, somebody that just, they just wanted human flourishing. They hated war. They hated destruction. Why can't we all just get along type of mentality? And he said it was like over 80% on the left that had no problems with war as long as it worked out well for us. And that a large majority on the right said, no, war is always bad. Sometimes it's necessary, but it's always bad. I was like, well, yeah, that's when human flourishing is central to the way to what you're after. It doesn't matter when or where. Like for me to say, well, I actually want Russia to flourish and I want the Ukraine to flourish, and war doesn't help that. It would be better if there was peace. Of course I want Iran to flourish. But if they try and drop a nuclear weapon on us, I hope we do everything we can to stop it and remove who's ever in power and all of that. But
yeah. You made me think about the international mediator that I believe that Gary North talks about, because the church doesn't have borders. It is the perfect international mediator, right?
Yeah. When you see that, like in the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons.
Ooh, go for it. I see it. Light it up.
You have the people that that you see saying we should be so excited about all of the immigrants moving in, and because look, there the gospel is we've got the international missions at our front door, and I keep thinking how historically ignorant that comment is, and it's not, but it's in a different sort of way, I think, that a lot of people are arguing, because God has actually done that sometimes. And so I was thinking about the Welsh, the Welsh now, in the year 500, they were the Britons, the Britons, but Britain comes from the name of the group that was ruling England, in 500, or was it 300? Right, it was 300 for sure. So, but what happens is you have these pirate kings, and depending on which historical school of thought you're in, they either showed up because they liked to raid, and bring things back, or they showed up because things had gone wrong in their homeland and they were looking for a new place. But either way, they showed up as raiders, right? And so some of them were conquering raiders, and some of them were more of the pirate style. We show up, we take your stuff, and we go away. But the Welsh ended up being pushed into Wales by the Anglo-Saxons taking over. And the Anglo-Saxons were heathens, right? They were and the Welsh were Christians, and they got conquered. They got pushed into Wales. Some of them stayed, but the Anglo-Saxons basically took over. Well, once they get complete control, there's kind of 7 pirate kings of England, that have pushed the Welsh out, and this is really where the Robin Hood stories begin. So the guy that Robin Hood is actually based on was probably one of the Welsh lords, that helped hold together the Welsh Christians when they got taken over. So then Rome ends up sending missionaries and converting the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity. But the Welsh were already Christians, and they had Celtic bishops. They had homegrown Celtic bishops, and now the Anglo-Saxons get converted over the course of about 100 years. They get converted, and they have bishops sent to them by Rome, who so the English are in direct connection to the Roman Church. Eventually, the bishop of the bishop of England is turned into an archbishop, and so you get the Archbishop of Canterbury. But the Celtic Church was not under the Roman, was not connected to Rome. They just had their bishops from an earlier converted state. Well, the Celtic Church would refuse to get into fellowship with the Anglo-Saxon Church, and because they had they use different calendars. And so when you hear somebody say, well, they disagreed on the dating of Easter, we act like that's such a silly little thing. But what we don't realize is that was actually 2 different civic systems, one of which had invaded and destroyed the other. Now they get converted, and they say, but Easter is on this date. So the Celts celebrated Easter on the first Sunday after the first full moon after Passover. The Anglo-Saxons celebrated Easter on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. So every
War!
yeah, it sounds like a small thing.
It does.
Except for the fact that the Anglo-Saxons, for one, the Anglo-Saxons had literally been killing and raiding and burning the libraries of the Celtic Christians up until their conversion. So there was well-won hatred.
Kind of like Paul killing your cousin. Something like that.
Right. Yeah. Like Paul killing your cousin. And now Paul shows up and they're really wary. They're like, whoa. But the other thing is, but here's the other thing that makes it even more complex is Pelagius.
Oh, yeah.
Pelagius argued for the Passover version of Easter, and the Nicene Creed, in its rejection of Pelagius, included not using the equinox version of the dating of Easter. So the Anglo-Saxons thought that the Celtic church was Pelagian. Now they weren't, but they hadn't gotten the news because they weren't a part of the of that whole debate, because they were they were busy being invaded and killed and raided by the Anglo-Saxons. So they weren't a part of that Nicene debate for that reason, right? So they're outside of that conversation. They have a tradition of celebrating Easter a particular time, and part of that is because Pelagius was a Celt. He was a Breton, but he was a Breton who had gone down to the Mediterranean. So you have all of this historical context, and the Welsh. It took about 100 years to work out and get into official fellowship, but the Welsh had refused to send. The Welsh had refused to send missionaries to the Anglo-Saxons because you had Iona, you had the different Celtic missionary centers. They were converting all sorts of people, but none of them wanted to convert the Anglo-Saxons because they were angry at them because they had burned down their churches, right? They did all sorts of things.
Valid.
Now eventually, it's valid, even though it is they're disobeying the command to love their enemies. But you understand, like, they're real enemies, right? They really were. But what ends up happening is it starts with the Celts refuse to acknowledge the authority of the Bishop of Canterbury over their bishop as an archbishop, and an Anglo-Saxon church sends a raiding party to kill the congregation of the bishop that refuses, and the archbishop says, no, that's not how we do things, and puts them under discipline for defending his claim with violence. And that begins the healing process, right? So if you look at it and say, well, we should just simply rejoice that God has brought us in the nations, and don't take into account the fact that they are invaders stealing resources, right? Now, whether it's it makes it worse when you find out that globalists are the ones funding the invaders and taking the commonwealth of our citizenry, right, is being handed to non-citizens by globalists, right?
And
when you look at so you see,
let me
that
add one more category to this real quick.
Okay.
When then you have people in America who then give legal status to someone or large groups of people, right? Like, that's another one,
right?
We've said you can be here, and then we use them,
as a lever to dislodge
the natives.
The natives, right? To dislodge the locals, or dislodge the citizenry is probably a better way to put it. because the citizenry should have rights to the wealth that is common to all, and that's one of the things that separates them from non-citizens. So you might have non-citizens that are there for a good reason. They have a green card, they have their nation is under duress and they had to flee from it. There's all sorts of reasons you might have a non-citizen with you, but they shouldn't have access to the citizenry's commonwealth, right? That's common to us, not common to all, right?
Right, that's right.
And but if you say, well, hey, God has used these things in the past for good, that's a little bit like saying, boy, I hope I hope I get captured as a slave someday, because St. Patrick was captured as a slave and God used that for good.
Yeah.
Say that's not how that works. It doesn't make the evil thing good because God used it for good.
I should go get a concubine and then let her get chopped into pieces, and that's what because God used that to really help.
That for good.
So use that.
Let's
get a golden calf, guys.
You hear a story about a drunk driver killing somebody's kid, and then them all becoming Christians and becoming like family later in life, and you think, whew, I'm gonna start drinking before I drive, right? Like that's bad logic. Now, do I believe that if the globalists win this and everybody's brought in, that the likelihood that God is going to use it for good and for the conversion of Haiti and all that? Well, of course I believe that. That's totally. Do I think that means that what we should do is say, we're giving away free stuff, come on in? No, that's
shall we continue in sin that grace may abound,
right?
God forbid.
And so to then shame the people whose stuff is being taken because they think because they're not being grateful that they're being robbed, because that's really what it is, right? It's theft when somebody, if I go into my neighbor's yard and I take his lawnmower and then I give it to somebody else, that's theft, right? And we're so used to the redistribution of wealth, we often we forget that it's theft. Or it's been happening to us for generations. But that's living under the rule of the mob and having to pay protection fees. You get used to it, but that doesn't suddenly make it right.
I think that also too, we've a lot of people like the idea of conservation, but conservation has become a socialistic idea to get us not to own anything. And so I think that idea has worked its way all the way out to common spaces as well. It's like, well, nobody owns. No, it's owned.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
right.
And so we just don't, this is the area in which we are all loving our neighbor in the process, because they're as responsible for this as I am responsible for this. And conservation makes where nobody's responsible for anything. And so there's like, that's the government's responsible for this. Well, who is this?
Yeah.
Right. And
because you used to actually make the distinction used to be made between environmentalists and conservationists.
Yeah.
But we can't even make that distinction anymore.
Not anymore. Yeah. Well, most of the conservationists are liberals. The large majority of them, especially in the hunting world, like that's what's surprising to me is I doing a lot of filming, a lot of production. I get to go on so many different journeys. When I got into conservation, I started finding those are the liberals with guns who don't want guns to be as widespread, but want people to own guns so that they can go and hunt. And it was really weird. This is why I knew exactly when Kamala said, "Hey, me and Walls have guns." I was like, I know what kind of person you are, right? They like to go duck hunting. They like to, that's fun, yeah. But personal protection, that's not what it's for. It's not for the government. It's not for that. But inside of that conservational world, the most of the people, the liberals, have found that world to take over. And what they do is they take it to flip people's lands into public property, in which they, as the conservationist institution, control it. And so there's nobody really responsible for it, you know.
Well, I think that used to be called environmentalism, right? Where conservation, so the public parks were a part of the conservationist movement, but public parks were also where are supposed to be governed on capitalist principles, right? The people that come use it pay for it, right? Or on Commonwealth principles. Everybody has access to this space, and so it can be paid for out of taxes. Now we pay to be told we can't use things, right? Taxes are used to set spaces aside for no one to use. Taxes are used to set spaces aside to be protected from people. That's so that it's not your wealth anymore. It's no longer the
Commonwealth.
The Commonwealth. It's no longer owned by all. Therefore, you use taxes for it. So, you've got some place like Yellowstone, where the idea is, well, we're gonna this should be protected to make sure that because it's all of ours, let's set up a way to make sure that it exists for the next generation. And so they charge at the gate, and they use that money for upkeep, upkeep and protection. That makes total sense in a Commonwealth understanding, right? Hunting licenses go back to the 8th century, right? That's how far back, because if the deer are everybody's, one person can't start harvesting them and selling them because they're everybody's, right? It's not owned by an individual, it's owned by all of us. The fish are the same way. So each family gets allotted their certain number of fish based on the ownership of the whole river by the community. Those sorts of things, that Deuteronomy gives the justification for hunting licenses. When it talks about the quail eggs, right? Don't go around taking all of the if one person goes around and takes all the mothers, then there's no eggs.
Right. We were just talking about that in the family.
Yeah. So you've got that isn't the issue, but the issue, if I said, well, but I'm going to bring a bunch of people, in from the Ukraine into my neighborhood.
Philistia. Let's just say Philistia.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to bring a bunch of people in from Philistia and put them in my backyard, and then they're all going to go out and they're going to hunt and bring home all the deer. Right? Then the issue that you have is, well, the deer aren't theirs. The upkeep of the environment, the upkeep of everything, that's paid for by
citizens.
The citizens, right? So the citizens are the ones that have a right to that, because we're the ones that paid in for the protection of it.
Unless you have indentured servitude concept, and then that's different, right?
As a way to become a citizen?
Right, because if you have an indentured servitude process, then that person is operating on behalf of the citizen.
Right. Yeah. So because they're part
nobody
of the family.
Likes that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, nobody likes
exactly.
that. Yeah,
nobody likes
that.
That.
But this, and if you understand that somebody becoming a citizen gives them legal access to all the Commonwealth, then you set your citizenship input system in a particular way. And there's a generous way to say, yes, we would love for you to become a citizen. Here's what you need to do. Here's the oaths of loyalty you need to take. Here's the way in. And those folks that come in that legal way are often some of the very best citizens because they're grateful for the welcome and the generosity. I've met folks that became citizens that way, and they just love America because it's given them
they're better Americans than me.
opportunity. Right? Yeah. Right. So, but that's because they're some of the few people that actually have been taught how the American system works, what the American system means, how the access to the Commonwealth works, right? And we don't train our own kids in a lot of these things.
Well, that's what I was going to say is like, it's having immigrants come to America has not been a problem for America historically. The problem we have now is that we don't have inculcation points for people who come into America, right? The church isn't there. The educational system has been completely overrun, taken over. The businesses have DEI all inside of them, and fascism is running rampant inside of our society. So all the free market is getting manipulated. I just said fascism, so enough said about that. But there's no real place for inculcation in American society anymore. And so then what, you have to create something else, or something else thrives alongside a parallel, not even a parallel. Something else builds out of that is diseased, right? Because or separate from it.
Black markets is what you get, right? Yeah.
Which black markets always hurt the original market, right? That's what happens when you create a unfair environment. You make it hard to be good. You make it hard to be righteous. When the government
doesn't punished for doing it right.
If you get punished for doing it right and you make more money doing it wrong, well, then you set up drugstores without a building on a corner,
right?
Selling the same thing everybody else selling,
right?
Just without the license.
without the license, without the taxes, without everything. And I think that we're just gonna, unfortunately, we're headed that direction. And I don't, but a lot of it comes down to there's I think that kind of corporate, there's a corporate, the corporate mind is diseased, and but it's diseased in every direction. It's not like over here, on the left things are bad, but over on the right things are good, right? You have you now have people on the right cheering when Trump says,
I'm going to boost tariffs on everybody.
Yeah, right. Like, do you know how this works? Like, there can be a wise use of tariffs. That's not. I don't think that's the tariff in and of itself is automatically evil. But most people don't even understand what he's saying, and they just think, hooray, somebody else is having to pay for it. Like, well, that's not actually how tariffs work. So there might be a good reason to implement a tariff, but it's not to get the other people to pay for stuff that I want.
I have to think about that because I don't know how tariffs would work apart from a system of mercantilism.
No, I'm not arguing for tariffs.
No, I know you're not. I'm just trying to think. I have to think about, like, if there's something that's wicked that the government says we don't have really any control to stop people from getting, but we want to incentivize good. So then you could possibly put a tariff on something. I just don't know if I trust that process by the government to do that. At least not right now. I'd have to think about that.
Yeah.
I can't think of a good tariff at the moment.
Or a good.
That wouldn't already be illegal.
I don't know if we have any good tariffs currently, but I think the idea of a tariff as a tax, for example, that is how you keep up ports, right? To say, okay, well, there's the use of this port that there's an import tax and it's going directly to keeping up the port, or there's different things like that. That I think you could make
I don't want the government owning the ports. Now, if you want to tax the safety of the transfer of goods from back and forth. I think I might give you that one, where there's a protection for the free enterprise to work, and because of our military, not necessarily, and you can tax that in one sense. I think I can see that as being, but I want the ports to be private.
Yeah, that I could see that. We don't currently have.
No,
I mean yeah. So
we're dreaming in one sense.
We're dreaming, yeah. So in an ideal world, to say we're going to have we're going to have pure private import export systems, you know, yeah, I think that probably would work better.
I don't mind. And when I say that, I guess to be clear, I think that the government has a right to say who comes in and out, and they can be there to enforce the border protection that are there. You know what I mean? So they can share this environment for the protection of the nation. It's just that it always goes into a control tariff, and then they get a little out of control, almost like if you look at it, the airport's all federal now.
Right. Yeah. And that's been, I think it's crazy how quickly people forgot that's abnormal.
I know
that in the history of the world, you have these private companies that are transportation companies. Now you have federal agents
who own them technically,
who own and operate all of these communication hubs. That there should have been an immediate lawsuit but it was fear, right? People were afraid. Then the federal government came in promising to keep us safer. Look at these shoe bombs.
Well, I mean, even with the strike from back in Reagan's time, and he fired all the guys, like it's like, I don't think the president can do that. I don't think the president is supposed to be firing nobody that's not in his complete direct authority. I could be wrong, but he shouldn't go and tell Walmart that all the managers are fired. I don't think that should happen.
Well, yes, it shouldn't. I agree.
Anyway,
if I was running the union, I would have done it long before that. But
well, I mean,
the right decision by the wrong person, though, can be much more destructive in the long run.
Well, because they set a precedent for what should happen, right? Well, if you don't do it, I'm going to do it, right? And goes back to what we're talking about with institutions and how important it is. Again, I don't see a way out of this apart from understanding the historical Christian narrative and worldview, and not just the one that we get in special revelation, but also the one we get from general revelation in time and space.
Time and space throughout history, yeah.
Throughout history, because I think we act as if God has not been sanctifying his people, right? And God has this. We forget the Holy Spirit has been sanctifying us post-cross.
Right. Well, and Christianity is not an ideology. It doesn't come in with the imposition of an ideal based on a set of
right
or based on a one idea worked out in many situations, right? Christianity is not an ideology. It's the church is a historical institution that grows and develops over time, and then
because of doctrine, right? Was it say doctrine?
Yeah, because of doctrine
and
liturgy, morality, right? With it, so you've got it has a moral code, it has a liturgical life, and which is within history, right? So it's got a calendar, it's got different things, and then it has doctrines, right? So it's not so an ideology. So communism is an ideology, right? Everything is rivalry is at the heart of communism. So you interpret everything according to this rivalrous idea, this idea that all is rivalry.
Can I just give an example
communism
of that?
says it's an economic rivalry, but there are other forms of communism. Or I mean, Karl Marx said it's an economic rivalry, but there's other forms of communism that place the rivalry in different places. But that's the ideology. All is rivalry. Go ahead.
I was just going to give an example of how all is rivalry. I was just watching CNN, and there was a black guy on there who was on the table arguing and said the only reason Trump is winning is because of white people in America. And then the panel kind of got like, oh man, what are you talking about? It's like, Trump's not advancing in black environments. He's only winning because of white people in America. And then the guy who was disagreeing with him, who I was interested to see what he was going to say, he said, no, Trump is winning because of man in America. And I was like, there goes the rivalries, right? It's black, white, it's man, woman. And then another person, no, Trump is winning because of the wealthy.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's all economic, right? So all of a sudden, all of these rivalries are, and by the way, they help you. If you get into those arguments, they intended to make you miss what the real issues really are, right? Like they make you miss the real rivalry, right?
Right.
Good, evil. God, not God, right? Freedom, not freedom. That's the reality of it. The gospel of Jesus Christ against secularism in the rest of the world, right? Christianity, rest of the world. Like that's what the real situation is. And they want to make sure that you miss it by pointing out, no, the world's not built around the Lord's table and what Christ has done on the cross. The world is built around man and woman. The world is built around sex. The world is built around white, black, purple, green, orange, right? Like that's what the world is really built around. It's like, no. And this is where we really have to be wise about this. The world is built around righteousness, the lordship of Christ, and everything else. Yeah. And that's the real rivalry. Right. And it's not really a rivalry because this is the reality that God is crushing his enemies. So we should always be in that context.
Well, I think that the attempt to stoke rivalry, it works when we forget that Jesus is the scapegoat. Right. It works when we forget that Jesus actually threw himself into the mouth of the rivalry and he was swallowed by the rivalry between God and man. And that was the rivalry. And then when he came out of the grave, that rivalry was destroyed. There's people that keep trying to revive it, and he remains the scapegoat that says that now he is bringing God and man together, and as God and man are brought together, man is restored to man as well, right? And that's but that's something that happens in time as well. It's not something that you just say, here's the ideal, we're just going to claim or declare the rivalries, that mankind is restored to mankind. When that's part of what the church is doing by faith. It's bringing that future where all of the people and the tribes and the tongues and the nations are before the throne of God worshiping together. We're bringing that future into the present by faith as we work through the details of this stuff, right? We work through the actual issues in front of us, and and work out how does a Christian nation bring immigrants in, right? That's a good question that we should be talking about and trying to figure out and do in a righteous way. And instead, rivalrous communities are built on shame, right? Instead, people keep trying to leverage shame, because shame is a way of saying that because of who you are and what you've done or what you're like, you're outside of the community, right? There's a really great Anglo-Saxon poem called The Wanderer, about a man who's meditating after he's been put out of the community. He's meditating on the shame. and on Christ and the effect that, but it's called the wanderer. But what is happening is shame is the tool of communities of control in rivalrous communities and tribal communities, and Christians need to learn what if shame is real, what you do with it, right? You lay it down at Christ's feet and it's taken away, and then refuse to be controlled by shame. And I do think this is, I think this is what attracts so many young men and is the good parts of things like White Boy Summer, where they're just saying like, I refuse to be ashamed of this thing,
absolutely,
of the way God made me, right? And that and that's something that I think the church hasn't done a good job of providing young men the clear, consistent declaration that God is not ashamed to call you brothers, or that Christ is not ashamed to call you brothers, right? Which is what it tells us in Hebrews. Jesus is not ashamed to have a young, raucous white boys in his church. He's not ashamed of them at all.
Amen.
And that, because that hasn't been communicated, they have to create their own ways to say that to one another. And I think that's the good part about White Boy Summer. And I think that refusal to be ashamed needs to just be so embedded deep within Christians that when they come along and they say, don't you feel terrible about what your ancestors have done? We say, why? No, of course not. What are you talking about? Right? What that makes no sense. That shame manipulation stops working on us because our identity is so deeply rooted in Christ as the one who was crucified naked to take all of our shame and was raised from the dead clothed, because our shame was left in the grave, right? That needs to be so deeply embedded within us that we're unmanipulable. It also turns us into better citizens in a righteous society, but that's a secondary thing in this particular moment. So, and, then I think that the church should hopefully teach us what it looks like to be shame takers, as we, in with the people around us as well, right? So
let me show you how to get rid of that shame.
Yeah, let me show you how to get rid of that, rather than entering into the system of shame and manipulation.